Oh, you just have to turn them on?
So this one's on. I'm not sure if yours is on. Just tap it to check.
Oh, they're all like, if you...
Okay, so these 3 are on. But these ones you have to push.
Oh, no, I gotta get down here, that's all. Thank you, thank you. Let's see, Scarborough Subway, Ueta.
Very good. So can you switch my slides for me? Okay.
Yeah, that's the one.
Sorry.
Oh,
Thank you.
good job.
Oh, yeah, no, it's not, but it looks like you're really done.
Yeah. Charlotte. Mine? Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, you did.
Do
you want to sit where the counter sits?
The mayor's chair is open right there.
Where are they?
Okay, you gonna go? Yeah.
Just let them know.
Okay. We've just got a few more people coming in. We'll wait another minute or two. And feel free to come on down. These first 3 rows are open if you want to sit at a counselor's table for the day. Start at 3:05. We'll start at 3:05. There's still a lot of people coming. Okay, we're going to get started. There's some free seats up in these rows towards the front that you're welcome to sit in. And there's some free seats on both of the sides as well. Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to today's meeting on the future of waste management planning in Toronto. My name is Robin Shilett, and I work for the City of Toronto's Public Consultation Unit. We are a team that works with various divisions across the city to organize, plan, facilitate, and report on lots of different public consultation processes, anything from solid waste to transportation, engineering and construction, Toronto Water, parks, all major infrastructure projects we get to work on. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Toronto City Hall is located on part of Turtle Island. The land on which we now stand is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat First Nations, and home to many diverse Indigenous people who walk gently on this land. We thank them for welcoming us here today. We also acknowledge that they offered assistance to the first European travelers to this territory and shared their knowledge for survival in what was at times a harsh climate. We seek a new relationship with the original peoples of this land based on honor and deep trust. I'd like to introduce to you the staff who will be presenting here today. We have Jim McKay, who's the General Manager of Solid Waste Management Services, Vince Sferrazza, the Director of Policy, Planning and Program Support, Annette Synowiec, Acting Manager of the Unit for Research, Innovation and a Circular Economy, and Charlotte Ueta, Acting Manager of Waste Management Planning. I'd also like to mention that this event is being webcast and welcome all of the viewers that we have listening in online. During the presentations, the only people that the webcast viewers will see are at this podium and the presentation slides, so you don't need to worry about being recorded. So, yes, they will miss you. So, do you want to go ahead to the agenda slide? Okay, so we have 3 presentations today. It's a content-heavy day. We're going to take a break after each presentation to go through questions and comments with the audience, and I'll go through a bit how that question and commenting process is going to work in a few minutes. So the first presentation is going to be an update on the long-term waste management strategy, and you're also going to hear about the new unit for research, innovation, and a circular economy. Then we're going to have a presentation on the WasteFree Ontario Act and other factors influencing the city's waste diversion programs. The third presentation is on the addition of new material considerations and policy considerations and conditions. And then we're going to wrap up and tell you about some new ways to get involved with waste management in Toronto. So, as I mentioned before, a few housekeeping items. This event is being recorded. It's posted on the city's YouTube channel. There is a link to it now on the Waste Strategy website. If you go to toronto.ca/waste strategy, and if you have any friends or colleagues who weren't able to tune in during today's meeting, there will be an archive of it online as well. Washrooms today, if you do feel like coming and behind our presenters, there are washrooms located back here. Otherwise, if you just go, Khadija, will you raise your hand so people can see where you are? Just go down this hallway. There's 2 washrooms out there as well. We will be recording notes from today. And can you skip ahead? We're on the Code of Conduct. Okay, great. So this event follows the city's Code of Conduct for public meetings. We welcome and encourage your participation, but to ensure that we have a productive meeting, we need everyone to respect and follow the city's Code of Conduct. So all individuals conducting business and attending meetings with the City of Toronto are expected to comply with the city's human rights and harassment policy. This means that no form of discrimination or harassment is tolerated, ignored, or condoned. In the event of non-compliance with the human rights and harassment policy, you may be asked to leave the meeting immediately. So for transparency, please note that all information collected today is in accordance with the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. Comments shared at this meeting will become part of the public record but will not be attributed to specific stakeholders, and all comments received during and after this meeting will be reviewed, recorded, and shared with city staff. The Lobbyist Registrar. So the Office of the Lobbyist Registrar ensures that public disclosure of lobbying activities and oversees the regulation of lobbyist conduct. Anyone lobbying public office holders of the City of Toronto must follow the provisions set out by the Lobbyist Code of Conduct and read the code before lobbying, and you can view the Code of Conduct online at toronto.ca/lobbying. Okay, so we're getting on to more interesting stuff, the goals and objectives for today's meeting. So we have 4 goals for today's session. One is to provide an update on the work and planning that is underway since City Council approved the long-term waste management strategy in July 2016. So as I said before, to do that, we'll be providing an update on the city's on the province's WasteFree Ontario Act, how the city has been engaged in providing comments on the implementation of this act, and how the act and other waste diversion factors may impact the city's waste diversion programs. We'll also be presenting key considerations and conditions on the new draft policy that the city will use when considering the addition of new materials to waste diversion streams, and throughout the meeting we'll be responding to questions and comments. So just before we move on, looking around the room, I'm seeing really great attendance, and we wanted to provide a bit of reasoning for why we chose to hold today's meeting during the day. Throughout consultation on the waste strategy, we found that our highest attendance was at daytime meetings, and that's really evident from today's session. This is the highest participation we've had at any session, so thank you all for coming. And again, the session is available online for anyone who couldn't be here with us today and would like to send in their comments or listen in. If you can skip ahead to the question process. So for a few different reasons today, we're going to be using a written comment card process. So when you came in, you should have received a rectangular comment card. Stephanie, do you mind holding one up? Okay, so if you have questions and comments throughout the sessions, Please write down your questions and comments, and Khadija, who's over here, is going to be coming up and down the aisles to collect these, that they will then read out during the Q&A periods. This helps us get to as many people as possible. It also helps with our sound recording to make sure that the questions and comments can actually be heard. And if you need more comment cards throughout the sessions, we'll also be able to give those to you. So, just wanted to get a sense before we get started with a show of hands, who here in the room has been to a past consultation related to the waste strategy? Okay, great. Is there anyone here from a nonprofit organization? Wonderful. What about from an environmental organization? Excellent. Do we have anyone here representing an apartment, a condo, a property manager? Excellent. Any 3Rs ambassadors? Oh. And what about city staff? All over here. Okay. Anyone from the industrial, commercial, or institutional sector? One. Okay. Two. Okay. Any contractors, waste haulers, or processors? Few. Great. Okay. Anyone from another municipality? Welcome. Okay, and what about any university students or researchers? A few of you guys as well. Great. Well, it's really wonderful for us to have such a diverse group listening in and participating today. And I'm going to pass it to Jim McKay, our General Manager of Solid Waste, for opening remarks.
Thanks, Rob. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I think everyone will understand the diversity in this room is incredible. To have that many different types of organizations, residents, members of the public, stakeholders all in the room together. We've had this type of representation before, not quite as many people as what we have today. But as we were developing this long-term strategy, we had this type of broad representation as we developed the strategy. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's been such a successful document as a guidance tool for us, is because it was really based on such broad stakeholder input right from day one. So it's great to see many of you back. It's great to see so many of our 3Rs ambassadors, because it's such a critical program that we've got to try and improve diversion in our multi-residential buildings. And hopefully we can keep moving that forward. I would like to say, though, normally when there's this many people in the gallery and council chambers, that means it's going to be a really ugly meeting. But there's not everybody's wearing the same colored t-shirts, which is a good sign. There is no picket signs out front, which is a good sign. I noticed the mayor's seat is empty, so no election hopefuls in the fall in the room that wanted to try out the mayor's seat for an afternoon. But seriously, thank you for all being here. We're quite proud of the long-term strategy. It was approved by Council in July of 2016. If you heard the update on the long-term financial plan for the city earlier this week from City Manager Peter Wallace, he mentioned that this strategy is one of the few that exists in the city that is a fully funded document. So not only does the document exist as a long-term strategy, it is funded and there is money committed to actually do everything that we say that we're going to do in this document. And I think you'll see a reflection of that in some of the material that you hear today, is that we're actually funded, we're resourced, and we're moving forward with a lot of really good initiatives. We're also quite proud of the document because it's won a number of international awards over the last couple of years. So for any of you who were at Nuit Blanche in 2016, I believe, There Is No Away art exhibit that represented issues around waste management and the importance of understanding that you can't just get rid of waste, that it still exists somewhere. Won Solid Waste Association of North America award. The long-term strategy itself last year won gold in North America for excellence in solid waste planning, which is one of the highest awards you can achieve in North America in the solid waste business. And then finally, in a couple of weeks, we're going to be receiving an award in Washington from the American Academy of Environmental Engineers and Scientists for the long-term strategy. So North American and truly international recognition of some of the types of concepts that have been explored in the long-term strategy, and some of the things that you'll hear today in terms of how do we incorporate a circular economy into a municipal waste management framework, and what is the role of a municipality in a circular economy. So a lot of really good stuff that'll come forward. And again, thank you for being here. Like I said, collaboration is key to moving this forward. You saw there's a few other members of other municipalities, neighboring municipalities that are here with us today. one of the things that we've really tried to push in terms of development of the strategy and now implementation of the strategy is that many of the issues that we deal with in waste management are not individual municipal issues that should be dealt with alone. There is a need for cross-municipal collaboration. We're seeing a lot more of that over the last year or two, and especially in some of the provincial initiatives that are coming forward, where municipalities, regardless of size across Ontario, are starting to rally together to understand what their role is, what their role should be, and where you've got large municipalities like the City of Toronto and small municipalities from Northern Ontario of 500 people all talking in the same language with the same types of priorities, the same types of interests, moving forward together. And I think that's where we will really be able to move forward some of the concepts that are in our long-term strategy and shared by these other municipalities. And the great news is also shared by the province, which we're going to give you a bit of an update on. The long-term strategy that we have is very much aligned with the provincial waste management framework. And I think partners moving forward, all the municipalities in the province together, we're going to be able to do some great things over the next few years. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Robin.
Thanks, Jim. So we're going to dive right into our presentations, and our first presentation is a waste strategy update and sharing of information on the new unit for research, innovation, and a circular economy, and I'm going to pass it to Charlotte and Annette for those presentations.
Great, welcome everyone. Brings me great honor and pleasure to provide an update on the long-term waste management strategy that you have all worked so hard to provide feedback to staff and to council to help inform the process as well as the plan itself. Throughout the development of the waste strategy, thousands of participants from all across the city provided great feedback. We engaged in some great dialogues, accessed key project information through a variety of consultation activities and engagement activities as well. So some of the activities that we had done over the past years was we hosted public information sessions, meetings with key stakeholders, members from the multi-residential sector, as well as the nonprofit, environmental, and social organizations as well. We've hosted a series of Waster Speaker Series where we promoted local waste diversion initiatives and organizations that are already doing quite a bit of work in helping to promote the culture of reduction and reuse. As Jim already mentioned, we did do an art installation just actually west of us around Bay Street using bales of recyclables from our own materials that we collected from our Blue Bin recycling program, and also some waste movie screens. Through that time, this resulted in receiving phenomenal feedback from the public with support for moving towards a zero waste and a circular economy goal. We heard loud and clear that there was a drive, a passion to really promote the 3 R's, so kind of focusing back on promoting reduction and reuse, repair, rewear, and share, and also looking for opportunities to improve diversion in our multi-residential buildings, so those are our apartment buildings and condominiums. So through the long-term waste management strategy, as I mentioned, we do have like I said, a zero waste, working towards an aspirational zero waste goal. So again, prioritizing, looking around ways to not create the waste to begin with, and really promoting the culture around rethinking what waste is all about, how it's being created, why are we creating it, do we really need it, and what's the best way to recover the resources before we send it to landfill for disposal. Some of the recommendations that came out of it was to essentially support a lot of the community partnerships and collaborations, not just with external organizations, but also working with our own internal divisions as well, such as Environment and Energy Division and Toronto Public Health, for example. So some of the key accomplishments I'd like to provide an update on that we did in 2017. 2017 was primarily a planning year. Staff worked very hard to conduct research, gather information, data, establish a baseline to see where we're at in our current state, and to also engage with stakeholders, those interested participants that came out through the consultation process, to learn a little bit more about the stuff that you guys are already doing out in the community, and to learn how we can best support all the waste reduction initiatives that are already taking place. In 2017, we implemented several initiatives to support diversion. Two of them I'd like to kind of point out here is the Mayor's Towering Challenge. So that's where the mayor, visited one of the showcase buildings in Scarborough and essentially put a challenge out to all the other buildings in the City of Toronto to also implement waste reduction initiatives to help promote diversion in their own apartments and condominiums. So it's great to see that there's some ambassadors here with us today. So I want to again thank you again for being a part of that solution to help us divert more from landfill. We also did develop some guides as well to help promote that diversion. So tenant engagement guide is something that we had put together for superintendents and property managers and owners to help engage keen residents that want to do more to kind of help change the waste diversion activities within their own buildings. Lastly, I just want to point out that most recently in late 2017, Toronto City Council approved the new Waste Reduction Community Grants Program. So you may have seen this in your circle, but essentially what we're looking is to help fund community-based waste reduction initiatives. So if there's an innovative idea on how to maybe engage your neighbors, your community on how to reduce waste, we'd like to hear about it. We want to help fund those projects. And again, give that opportunity back to the residents to become more involved in helping to shape their own environment. In 2018, what we'll be looking at are essentially 4 areas of focus. The first one is textile diversion or textile waste. So currently the City of Toronto asks residents to place their textiles in the garbage. If it's donatable, rewearable, repairable, we do ask that try to reuse it and to donate to a nonprofit or to a charity organization for reuse. So what we're doing with this essentially is to promote a culture of repair, rewear, maybe think about fast fashion, thinking about how your purchasing habits and what you do with it afterwards. We're also going to be focusing on food waste reduction. So again, raising awareness on the amount of food waste that we're seeing in our waste streams. And maybe looking for better ways to reduce that by making, smoothies or doing something with your leftovers rather than putting in your green bin or even worse, in your garbage bin. Multi-res, so we continue to support and focus on about 50% of our population lives in these types of dwellings. So we want to look at policies, programs, initiatives to really help increase the diversion rate for the sector. So some of the areas that we're looking to kind of promote and enhance are around the 3Rs Ambassador Volunteer Program. So how do we enhance and implement that to all the buildings in the City of Toronto, as well as supporting superintendents, property managers to implement a better waste management system to make it more user-friendly, accessible, so on. Last piece that we'll be really heavily focusing on for 2018 is communication. So throughout the consultation process, we actually got quite a bit of feedback on residents wanting to get their information in different ways. So we heard loud and clear that there was an appetite for seeing a mobile app being developed to help inform residents on when to set out their materials or set out their bin for collection. Maybe also to look up where they can find their local nearest donation center, or maybe the drop-off depot where they can take their tires and other items for disposal. So that's something that our team is working on this year, as well as looking at creative and interactive education campaigns. So some of you may be aware of the Recycle Right campaign, where we're again trying to focus and raise awareness on the amount of contamination that we see in the recycling program and what you can do to help reduce that. And just some other key areas I'd like to highlight for 2018. So partnerships is something that we're really focusing on for the division, not just with external organizations, but also strengthening our partnerships with our own internal city divisions. So for those that were here earlier throughout the open house, my colleague from Social Development and Finance Admin was here talking about these 5 projects, and essentially what we'll be looking to do is through SDFA, through their strong presence and relationships that they've built over the years with the local communities, we want to leverage that and essentially, get our messaging out to these communities. So we've looked at implementing 5 new pilot projects, which I'll speak briefly upon each one of them. So the bike repair essentially is to promote a culture, again, sustainable transportation, engaging local youth to help repair the bikes. And Urban Harvest is a program that we're looking to raise awareness around food waste reduction. So again, looking at the surplus fruits and vegetables that are being grown in some of the older neighborhoods that have large fruit trees, looking at ways to collect and redistribute that, as well as looking at ways to maybe encouraging those to, canning and preserving those items as well. Community composting, again, is to raise benefits or raise the awareness around the benefits of composting, and again, hoping to encourage residents to become involved in local community initiatives, as well as putting items in a green bin for composting as well. The Sewing Cooperative looks at targeting textile waste, so again, promoting that culture of repair. So rather than throwing out a shirt with a hole in it or throwing out a shirt with a button missing from it, we're training and teaching residents how to get back to home economics and using a sewing machine to kind of make those minor repairs to continue to rewear those items for a longer term. And lastly, to promote the culture of reuse and share. So items such as sports equipment, camping equipment, tools and such. rather than everyone going out here and buying one of these items for themselves, why not create a culture of community and sharing and swapping, getting to know your neighbors, members within your community, to kind of use those items. So the great thing about this approach is that they're all interconnected. So for example, if you take engage the youth to repair bikes. So you create these youth employment as well as training certification. These bikes are then used to go out and collect surplus fruits and vegetables from neighborhoods. So they're out there canvassing. Volunteers are going to homes and seeing if there's some surplus fruits and vegetables that they want to donate. They're collected by the bikes. They're collected in reusable cloth bags that are being sewn by the sewing cooperative. So these are folks who are coming to learn how to use a sewing machine, learn how to create new items. So then from there, we take the collected foods, we then redistribute it and promote things like culture of canning and preserving, right? So I think there's a lot of knowledge from maybe the older generation can be passed down to younger generations. So again, we're kind of transcending the boundaries of ageism as well and sharing this information across generations. But even better is what this also does. It supports many other city strategies other than just the long-term waste management strategy. So just to name a few, this sort of model also supports the Transform TO, so lowering greenhouse gases, as well as looking at supporting strong neighborhoods, the Toronto Newcomer Strategy, poverty reduction, as well as senior strategy and tower renewal. So there's a lot of benefits and outcomes that comes from this sort of approach where we're, again, integrating our messages, our programming, and supporting other city initiatives to kind of achieve city and strengthen city strategies and goals. So that's just a bit of a taste of some of the things that we will be doing in 2018. I'm excited. If you haven't already, please come speak to staff and visit the information tables upstairs. I'd be happy to share more information about how you can become engaged in these initiatives. So we're planning and programming is underway, and hopefully we'll be launching these programs in 2018 later this spring. So with that, I would like to introduce my colleague, Annette, who is going to be talking and sharing us information about the Unit for Research, Innovation, and Circular Economy.
Thanks very much, Charlotte. So in addition to the updates that Charlotte provided, the strategy does introduce the formation of the Unit for Research, Innovation, and the Circular Economy. And we are really happy to have you as the crowd today that we've actually come out publicly and launched this unit. But before I tell you more about what great things that we're working on, I wanted to explain a little bit more about what a circular economy is. So really it's based on three principles. It's based on an intention to design out waste and pollution from the goods, products, services that we use and the services that we consume. And secondly, it's to keep products and materials and resources in use for as long as possible and at their maximum utility and value at all times. And thirdly, it's constantly looking for better ways for system designs and ways to regenerate natural systems. So the circular economy is an approach that looks further than our current linear ways of consumption and activity. So basically moving away from the take, make, and dispose model towards more of which was more of an extractive and industrial model. The circular economy is restorative and regenerative by design. It relies on system-wide innovations, and it aims to redefine products and services where we purposely think, anticipate, and design out that waste and minimize any negative impacts. The circular economy is supported by a shift towards using more renewable energy sources and builds economic, environmental, and social capital. A circular economy aims to redefine growth, focusing on positive social society-wide benefits, and it works to break apart our growth in economic activity away from the consumption of limited finite resources. So we have a pretty big mandate in the City of Toronto. This unit is tasked with making the City of Toronto the first municipality in the province to become a circular city. And as soon as our unit launched, we were put to task with moving forward on another number of items, including developing a framework for the unit, hiring resources to do the work, identifying the supports that we would need to make our work a success, taking on projects already in progress, and building capacity on a circular economy at the same time within the city. And next I'll be talking about the 3 different work streams that we put in place in order to achieve these goals of advancing new and innovative ideas to support a circular economy, promoting and helping develop new material recycling, creating new opportunities for social innovation and partnerships, and outlining a roadmap together with other city divisions on how to become a circular city. So like I mentioned, there's 3 main work streams that kind of make up the Unit for Research, Innovation, and a Circular Economy. And that first work stream is all about the projects that we're working on. So one of the projects that we've recently been engaged with is our work on coffee pods. So there's many different types of coffee pods available for consumers to choose from. There's recyclable, there's compostable, there's reusable, there's ones that are neither. So we've actually held 2 meetings on the events with coffee pod industry stakeholders. The first meeting held was in order to present a methodology that was developed in order to test compostable coffee pods in the city's organics green bin processing facilities. And it was also to have a discussion on the potential for product standardization amongst formats in coffee pods to make it easier to communicate how residents should manage these products in the waste stream. More recently, we actually consulted on the draft policy that you'll also see here today. We're also having some preliminary discussions on, with a technology provider on a mobile data center. So basically the concept behind that project is leveraging our city assets that are currently in use to see if there's ways that we can get more data on other city programs to potentially take other vehicles off the road and inform those other city programs. Thirdly, we're working on a process to design a circular economy procurement framework for the city, and that is happening together with other divisions within the city outside of solid waste, so really a city-led process there. And lastly, we're working on a request for proposal to look at mixed waste processing. And mixed waste processing in order to recover more resources and recyclable material from the residual waste stream with a focus on specifically multi-residential buildings. And like Jim mentioned before, all of the projects that you see here today are funded through the long-term waste management strategy. Secondly, we also have developed a number of partnerships. We've recently joined the Circular Economy National Zero Waste Working Group. We've been other group members of, for example, we've been members of their food waste reduction working group, and we've also helped to organize satellite zero waste annual events that have occurred that take place in Vancouver, but then are actually satellite displayed here in Toronto. We've also joined the Environmental Research and Education Foundation, which is an academia-based research foundation based first in the States, but has recently come to Canada. So the City of Toronto is a steering committee member on that, that new foundational group here. Sitting at that table is not only municipalities, but also academia, waste service providers, and experts in the waste consulting firm. And finally, we're working with local community groups and not-for-profits and looking at relationships with artists. And an example of working with not-for-profit groups is that in delivering a circular economy workshops that are coming up later on this week, we've partnered with the Recycling Council of Ontario in order to deliver those workshops. Really what we want to see here is a multi-year plan, however, to actually build upon these partnerships in order to advance a circular economy. Finally, in order to create Toronto to be a circular economy city, we really want to work on developing capacity within our people. And that means more than just within solid waste management services. So within there, we have developed a champion group that will help us look at all the projects as they go through initiation to implementation and to final execution. So we've kind of developed that champion group within, but then at a broader level, we've gone outside of our division, so that multi-divisional, cross-divisional circular economy working group. Sitting at that group is members from Toronto Water, Transportation Services, City Planning, Environment and Energy Division, Economic Development, Purchasing and Materials Management, and facilities, as well as parks, recreation, and forestry. So quite a broad, diverse group there that's all commenting on the circular economy procurement framework. And finally, we're looking to start planning a circular economy external advisory working group. So we'd love to get some comments back on that today, and then we'll also be having a survey to get more input on how that group should be developed. But really here it's about developing capacity for the work that we're doing. And finally, as we undertake our work in both the long-term strategy and in the Unit for Research, Innovation and a Circular Economy, we are looking constantly to the province's WasteFree Ontario Act. It does define what a circular economy is and has a roadmap for implementation, so we're paying close attention to that. And we'll be speaking about that in our next presentation. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot. Hello?
This should be on. It's, yeah.
Okay, so Khadija is going to wander up and down the aisles for a minute and collect any questions or comments that we had about that first presentation. We're about 10 minutes behind schedule, so I think we'll have time to get to a few. If you're close to Stephanie, who's right here in the middle, you're also welcome to just drop them off. I see we have a few coming in. Okay. Stephanie, do you have one over there you're able to read? Yeah, it should be working now.
Okay, great. I have a question here and comment. Okay, this one with regards to municipal partnerships around reduction and reuse. And that's, will the city be engaging with existing organizations that are already championing similar initiatives? For example, Charlie Freewheels or Bike Sauce, which does bike repair and youth engagement, Not Far From the Tree, which does urban fruit tree harvesting and redistribution. Ideally, the city, and this is an additional comment, but ideally the city should consider engaging these existing groups and organizations to help reach new audiences and avoid reinventing the wheel.
Yep. Okay, I'll take a shot at answering that one. The quick answer is yes, absolutely. One of the things that we found through the development of the long-term strategy, and I think it's a bit of a mindset shift that we've gone through as a division, is we aren't necessarily the best people to manage some of these programs or to deliver some of these services. In some cases, it could be a not-for-profit agency, a community group that is actually in a much better position to deliver some of these services, different types of organizations, than what we are. The role of the city may very well be as a collaborator, an enabler, somebody who can help get the message out about all these other types of services, like an urban harvest and the types of things that they offer within a community. We don't necessarily want to see the material that they manage is organic material. We don't necessarily want to see that coming through the green bin or leaf and yard. It can be used in other places. So that's what this strategy is all about, is trying to find those linkages and partnerships and not necessarily take over something that's already been done, but helping to actually enable it to do even better.
Thanks, Jim. So let's see if we can get to one or two more questions before we move on.
This one, will the food waste reduction strategy include businesses such as restaurants, bakeries, grocers, etc.?
Short answer again, yes. We typically don't manage a lot of that material through our system, but that doesn't necessarily mean as a city we shouldn't help to encourage reduction of food waste in a number of those other types of establishments as well.
Okay, let's do one more question, and we're going to have two more question and answer periods throughout, so we'll hopefully have a bit more time for those. So final question.
It's regarding public versus private waste collection. Why does the city refuse to collect waste from old buildings that became locked into private waste collection, which do not encourage recycling, when these buildings need the public collection?
We don't refuse to collect that material. We have a number of conditions that they must satisfy in order for us to provide that collection service. So one of them is they have to be willing to provide a three-stream service. So it's got to be garbage, recycling, and organics in order to be on our system. They have to meet certain space requirements in order for our vehicles to access safely get in to service the bins and get back out again, those types of things. But we don't typically, for multi-residential buildings, we don't really refuse anyone. It's up to them to come to us and request the service, and we'll work with them to try and find a way to provide that service.
Okay. Thanks, Jim. So I'm going to move us along. If you do have questions during the next presentation, Khadija in the black blazer right here is going to be wandering up and down, or if you need more cards, just raise your hands as well, and she can give those to you. So I'm going to pass it to Jim now, who's going to talk about the new WasteFree Ontario Act.
I'll just take care of it. Okay. Thanks, Robin. Okay. Annette's driving, I'm talking. So I'm going to give you an update on, there's a lot of provincial legislation that's coming forward that has a fairly significant impact on blue box recycling or blue bin recycling here in the city. It has an impact on organics and how they're managed in the city. Pretty fundamental game-changing type legislation in Ontario. That legislation is coming under two acts, the Resource Recovery and Circular Economy Act, which is essentially the end game of where the province wants to get to, and then there's the Waste Diversion Transition Act, which is the enabling legislation that will help us get from where we are today to ultimately that end game. There's also a strategy for WasteFree Ontario. You saw a clip of it in one of the previous slides, which is a supporting document that the province has put out that provides discussion around what they see that sort of long-term vision looking like in the city. It sets out a number of goals and objectives, some initial policy statements on what they'd like to see waste management look like in the province moving forward. It includes aspirational goals for zero waste and for zero greenhouse gas emissions, which is also something that we're working on here in the city in solid waste, is reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and our carbon footprint. It also has a proposed organic framework, which really focuses in on food waste and organic material in the province. And it has some pretty significant items in there. It discusses an organics landfill, ban on organics into landfill. So that means any of the garbage that's going into landfill today, in the future, once a ban is put in place, there cannot be any organics in that garbage moving forward going into a landfill. That, personally, I think it's a great piece of legislation to put something like that in place. It is going to take some time to get there because there aren't the programs in place to actually be able to manage that much organics, and there certainly aren't the facilities in place to be able to manage that stuff either. But I think the long-term objective is great. Mandated green bin programs. We already have a green bin program here in the city for our residential and portion of our commercial. Some companies, businesses, multi-residential buildings that aren't on the city system also have green bin programs. Not all of them do. Under current legislation, they're not required to. Under new legislation, they could be required to. Again, looking at the amount of food waste that's being, in essence, mismanaged today by going into the landfill sites is a great initiative in the strategy. And then looking at diversion targets. Looking at diversion targets in terms of reducing the amount of material going to landfill, but also under the lens of the circular economy that Annette talked about, different ways of managing that material before it ever becomes a waste. This legislation has some pretty significant impacts in some cases, for the most part good to the city. But what we need to understand is what is our future role in waste management going to look like. As I mentioned, with some of these reduce, reuse, repair type initiatives, we may not be the service provider in the future. We're the enabler or the communicator or the collaborator that helps to facilitate that. In other cases with respect to, say, recycling, we may not even be the service provider in the future under this type of legislation. The service providers could be under contract to the producers or the stewards of this material, where the companies such as a Loblaws, a Unilever, Procter & Gamble, Walmart, Canadian Tire, the companies that are ultimately responsible for putting products and packaging into the marketplace are also going to be in the future responsible for the end-of-life management of those products and packaging financially. Right now they're responsible for up to about 50% of that cost. In the future that would be 100%. In exchange, what they have said is if we're going to fund 100% of this system, we want control over the system as well. So those are discussions that are happening now, quite a significant discussions over the last year or so, and will continue over the next number of years as to what that program and what that system might look like moving forward. As you can imagine, if they fund 100% of the cost, that is actually a pretty significant cost reduction to the city in terms of providing these services. It's a bit of a misnomer. Many people believe that recycling is free. It is absolutely not in the city. Our total cost to manage recycling in the city right now through the city system is in the neighborhood of $70 million. We get some funding from steward organizations to offset that cost. We get revenue in some cases from selling of material like the aluminum that we collect, or the steel, or the paper, or we used to get it for paper that we collect. But in the end, from that $70 million, we still have a $40 million cost to provide recycling services in the city. Theoretically, a large portion of that $40 million should disappear as a cost to the city moving forward under this new type of system. So there's pretty significant financial implications of moving forward with what is called extended producer responsibility, where the producers become responsible for the end-of-life management of those packages in particular. It also, beyond the financial, it also has a lot of potential to add additional materials that aren't currently funded or aren't currently collected in the system. Materials like textiles, as Charlotte was talking about, that we're looking at right now, other types of packaging coming through the system that we're starting to see more of, Amazon-type packaging as more and more materials get delivered to your door instead of going into a store and buying that package, looking at how these different packages are coming into the household and then who's ultimately responsible for managing those, mattresses, those types of things. The greater advantage to this, I think more so than just the financial, is if you place the responsibility on the producer for the package that they are putting into the market, and they now become fully financially accountable for that package, they will start to look at redesigning that package to reduce their costs. And that is part of I think one of the fundamental problems we have as municipalities today is that we're left responsible for managing somebody else's problem in some cases. You put the responsibility on those who are putting the material into the market. Ultimately, we should see concepts like design for environment, reduced packaging, all these types of things, different types of packaging, using recyclable packaging or compostable packaging instead of basically garbage that we see today. Those types of concepts should come through in an EPR type model, and working closely with the province to deliver that. There's a lot of challenges in the existing waste diversion system that we've got today. Probably the biggest threat to our entire waste diversion program right now is contamination in the City of Toronto, and that is shared by some of our neighbours. A couple of them are in the room today on contamination in the blue bin stream. That is garbage or residual, non-recyclable material that are ending up in the blue bins. At the end of the year, we're sitting around 25%. We're up over 30% right now. So 30% of the material that we collect in the recycling bin is garbage of some sort. Some of it is truly garbage, and it's quite disappointing when you see what that material is. It's blatantly obvious that it is garbage. It's food waste that's going in there. It's clothing that's going in there. It's a mattress that gets shoved into a blue bin dumpster. Like it's completely ridiculous, some of the stuff that we see coming in the recycling bin. Others is products that in some cases are actually labeled as recyclable. They have that little Mobius loop on them that says that this is recyclable. That may be true according to a laboratory definition of what the plastic is. It's not acceptable in our recycling system. Our facilities, our services can't handle that material. That is contributing contamination. The other challenge that we have is we operate a recycling program in the context of greater commodity markets. Those markets are subject to change just like every other commodity market. And we are facing some significant change in the recycling markets right now because in large part due to influences on foreign environmental policy. China has come forward with a new environmental policy. China was procuring up to 50% of the total recycling generated in the world as of the end of last year. They have now put in greater quality restrictions. Certain materials that they were accepting previously, they won't accept anymore. In other cases, they're still accepting them, but they must be cleaner. This has caused a significant disruption in the recycling business in North America, parts of Europe, Australia, where there are in some cases municipalities right now that are landfilling their recycling because they simply don't have a market to send that material to, or they simply can't afford to pay to get rid of their recycling, so they are landfilling it right now. Not a situation that we're in yet today. Fortunately, we still have markets to be able to ship our material, but it is a serious issue that we're dealing with. It will be a major financial pressure in the city this year and moving forward until we can get our contamination down. But it is a big issue. So every time I have an opportunity to comment on this sort of stuff, I want to stress the importance of we need to make sure the recycling is cleaner than what we're seeing today. So anything that anyone in this room can do to help get that message out, I would greatly appreciate it, as would all the taxpayers in the city. Where are we now? So all this legislation is moving forward. The City of Toronto is at the table for all of that legislation, as are a bunch of our neighbours in the municipalities. As I mentioned, there's a lot of collaboration going on with municipalities. We've worked with some of our neighbors to form a group called the Municipal 3Rs Collaborative, so that all the municipalities across Ontario are speaking with one common voice when we're responding to provincial legislation now. It's become a very powerful organization. Rather than the province getting 200, 300, 400 different sets of comments that say slightly different things on a piece of legislation, they get one now that represents the municipal interests from across Ontario. So that has allowed us to be much more unified in what we're asking for. It actually should allow us to move much more quickly on things once we get our collective stuff together, and then we can work with the province directly on moving some of it forward. And with that, I think just in the interest of time, I'll stop and hand it back over to Robin.
Okay, I think maybe you can stay up there, Jim, because we're going to be taking questions and clarifications from that presentation. So I think, Stephanie, you have a few ready to go, and Katija, again, is in the audience, and she's ready to collect questions or comments, or issue new cards if you need those as well.
Working? Okay. With regards to the changes in markets, global markets for recyclables, from an operations standpoint, what is the city's game plan to address the potential impacts of China's heightened standards on exported waste over the next 2 to 3 years?
Besides hoping and praying that it's going to get resolved from a political perspective, working closely with groups like the provincial government, the federal government, World Trade Organizations, those types of larger associations, North American and European based, to try and put pressure back on China to open the door or loosen some of the restrictions. Part of the problem is the material that we are sending, not just us but a lot of other people, has been getting dirtier and dirtier over time. So we need to work on our programs and systems to clean up the material. We're working with our processor right now who manages and processes the blue bin material once it's collected, to put in different types of technologies or different processes, more sorters, to try and be able to separate out some of that material that was normally going into a bale would get separated out now before it gets into that process. But to give you an idea of the strictness right now, a piece of paper, just a clean piece of paper, single sheet of paper, that, last year is recyclable. Right now it's recyclable. If you have a small coffee stain on that piece of paper, last year that was still recyclable. Now it's garbage. Just as something as simple as a coffee stain on a piece of paper makes that paper garbage. So that's what we're hearing from our processor right now. That's what we're hearing from the Chinese markets right now. So we've got to do a much better job of getting the material cleaner. So we've done a number of targeted items, some of which I'm not a very popular person in certain areas, where we've been charging people for doing certain things that they shouldn't be doing. Getting much more aggressive. It's one thing if material is ending up in the blue bin because it's an honest mistake. It was labeled as recyclable and it's not. Those are the people who really want to try and recycle and do a good thing, and we just need to work with them and educate them on what may or may not be recyclable. The people who are throwing bags of garbage, mattresses, literally the kitchen sink into a blue bin, those are the individuals that we're going curbside now, single-family curbside. If we see that sort of material, we'll issue a notification the first time around. If we see it the second time around, we'll push that bin back and refuse to collect it, and leave a note that says, this is what's wrong with it, you need to clean it up before we'll collect it again. Okay. On the multi-residential side, we're going, and if we identify a bin that's full of garbage, that's a recycling bin, we'll actually reject that bin. We'll radio back to the recycling truck and say, don't even bother coming. Send in the garbage truck, we'll collect it as a garbage lift, and then we'll bill that building for the garbage lift. So there is a financial penalty associated with doing the wrong thing. By taking these types of actions, we're still early days. It seems to be working. We haven't got to the point where we're going to start issuing fines yet. We've certainly been discussing it. It's been talked about in the media a number of times, fining people for not recycling properly. Like I said, we haven't got there yet, but with the types of restrictions we're seeing, we may get there very soon.
Okay, so I saw a lot of questions come in, so let's try to get through them as quickly as possible.
Okay. Number of questions about responsibility on producers and what that means for transferring costs back to consumers, and whether there's any way that the city could mitigate that transfer of costs.
Well, I think, right now, residents and consumers are the same people. And I think we need to understand that. Whether you're paying the bill through your tax bill, through a rate bill, or it's on the point of purchase bill, you're paying those costs already. So it's not like these will be new costs somewhere else. They're just born in a different part of the system. What we hope will happen is that the overall system costs will go down because the people who are responsible in some cases for those costs going up because of the materials they're putting into the system in the first place, if those materials disappear, the system cost should go down, which should theoretically give everyone a break.
Great. We have another question.
All right. Sorry, I'm just trying to see what there is in terms of commonality here. Does the city have a plan to create new incentives to reduce contamination of different waste streams?
Our incentive is right now, trying to play to the good environmentalist in every one of us that this is the right thing to do, not only for children, but for grandchildren and future generations. Because it's hard to provide an incentive when there's already a cost associated with what we're doing. So you provide an incentive when there's already a cost, and all you do is just increase costs. So we're trying to avoid that. What we're targeting on is those individuals who are not doing a good job, and in some cases blatantly not doing a good job, and trying to get them into alignment to where they need to be. We've been using the carrot for a very long time in the recycling industry. It's time to maybe bring out the stick a little bit.
Okay, thanks, Jim.
Like I said, I'm not a popular guy in some places.
Okay, we have about 5 more minutes for questions on this presentation.
There's a number of questions about commercial waste. How do you reconcile municipal waste management efforts with ongoing unregulated waste produced in commercial sites like restaurants?
So the restaurants that we pick up from, we can regulate that pretty quickly. They are required to comply with the same programs that residences are. The ones that we don't manage, there is legislation in the province right now that requires buildings, industries, operations of certain sizes to have certain types of programs in place. It's called the 3Rs regs, Reg 102 and 104 or 103. They've been around since 1994. They haven't ever really been enforced since 1994, so that is a problem. As part of this new legislation, our understanding is the province is looking at revising that as well. We as the city are also looking at what powers we have under the City of Toronto Act to whether the province says that they have to or not. Is there an ability under the City of Toronto Act to require, in some cases, industries, commercial operations, institutions to have organics programs, recycling programs, garbage, regardless of whether the province legislates it?
Thanks. Okay, let's do 2 more questions.
A question about commercial office space. How will more stringent provincial and municipal policies affect commercial offices in terms of organics and contamination, and how will the province and City of Toronto monitor the contamination and mixed waste processing from those facilities?
That's a great question. There is somebody from the province here, but I won't point them out to answer that. It's great to see somebody from the province here, by the way. So we don't collect from very many of those commercial buildings. We will try to use whatever powers we can under a bylaw to make sure that they are doing the right thing. But when you don't actually manage the waste, it's very difficult to do a quality control on the types of programs that they've got. That's a bit of an excuse right now, and we recognize that. So we're looking at a way, can we take on a broader role to be able to more effectively encourage them to do the right thing? But it's not just on the municipality's shoulders. There are other companies out there that are starting to recognize now on the private side that are servicing these buildings. There is a growing interest in, say, organics diversion. Organics diversion is actually very expensive, but more corporate social responsibility type programs, corporate environmental programs that we're starting to see. There are more and more that are companies that are trying to green their image and are starting to do the right thing and look at putting these types of programs in, whether it's mandated or legislated or not.
Okay, thanks. And let's wrap up with one last question, if you got one.
This is sort of two-pronged question around specific items and whether the city has a plan around coffee cups in terms of punishing big chain businesses, as well as black plastics and black styrofoam, and whether those particular materials, there are plans associated with those.
So you're going to hear a little bit later around what our approach is going to be to new materials like this. There are operational issues with something like black plastic. There's market issues We typically try to collect recycling because there is value in that material, but in some cases, like a black plastic right now, there's actually very little value in black plastic. It's very difficult to sort at our recycling facilities, so we can't necessarily sort it out very well. But we're looking at, and we'll talk about this in the next session, these materials that exist in the garbage today that we don't accept. How do we move forward with a process, and what does that process look like to start to bring them into the blue bin or bring them into the green bin, and how we can divert more and more material away from the landfill? That's ultimately the goal, and it's a goal of the circular economy, it's a goal of our strategy, and I think it should be a broader environmental goal for everyone, is less disposal, more reuse, reduce, repair, recycle. Try to keep, as Annette showed in her diagram, keep that material moving through the system rather than it ending up in a landfill. But each one of those individual materials can be a problem. So in some cases, one solution will not resolve all the different types of materials that we deal with. It will have to be individual solutions, and some of those solutions can cost a lot of money. So it becomes a question of how much money do you spend on actually getting black plastic out of the system? And who should foot the bill for that? And that's something we'll talk about in the next session.
Okay, I think that's a really good segue to our next presentation from Vince Sferrazza, who's going to discuss a new policy for addition of new materials to city waste diversion streams. And again, please just raise your hand if you need any new comment cards, and Katisha can bring those around, and we'll be collecting them afterwards.
Hello, everyone, and I'd like to also thank everybody for coming here today. Jim's segue was perfect, and now Annette and myself will present to you a new policy, a new approach that we are developing that will essentially govern how new materials will be added into our diversion programs, whether it be the blue bin or the green bin or other diversion systems that we operate and manage. This will be approach, that policy that we would implement. And it is a policy and approach that is founded on existing authorities provided to the City of Toronto staff within our existing waste bylaws and within the City of Toronto Act. So this is something that we have already at our disposal that we can utilize. And in fact, to our neighboring municipalities, this is actually authorities that exist within the Municipal Act. So they're not exclusive to the City of Toronto. They are available to municipalities all across Ontario. We here at the City are developing a policy that will in fact engage these authorities into a comprehensive, consolidated approach. So, what is it that we're trying to achieve with this new policy? One, it determines any changes to the management of new packaging materials through our waste systems. As Jim mentioned, currently there are products, materials, packaging that are being collected and managed through our garbage system, but could possibly instead be managed through our diversion programs, as long as there are benefits environmentally, socially, and fiscally. And it introduces a city-led streamlined process to consider new packaging materials entering into the stream. So this will now provide a public, transparent, and hopefully easy to understand approach, so that if there is a steward, if there is a producer, if there is any industry interested that would like to have their packaging product material into our diversion programs, it is there for their consideration and would be clear and understand exactly how it would be implemented in Toronto. And importantly, it does include a component of extended producer responsibility. Primarily, there is a cost recovery component to this policy. So, as I will explain later on, the costs associated with recovering those particular materials in the city's diversion programs would need to be recovered by the producer by the steward, by that manufacturer, by that company that we would be engaged in agreement with. Next slide. So how is it going to be done? It's going to be done by implementing various considerations and conditions, and these will be exercised within an actual agreement between the city and the other party. And there could be a number of agreements. There could be an agreement associated with testing, and we'll go into greater detail exactly what we mean by that. That in fact there have to be some quantifiable results, either through a test undertaken at our facility or through any other facility that may already undertaken these tests, to demonstrate in fact that the material can be processed. And if that test is successful, then there would be an agreement between the city and the other party. So here are the 4 steps. We call it ADAPT. And these are essentially the steps that would be undertaken throughout this policy. First one would be awareness. We become aware, whether it be through council directive, whether it be through a resident request, a regulation, whatever that communication to us to bring us or give us that awareness about a particular material wanting to be in the diversion system, we would then consider it. And that's where we would then have to decide whether or not there is sufficient reason or evidence for that material to be considered through this policy, through this process. We would then start applying the policy. The first part, which Annette will go through, outlines a whole series of considerations that we would apply to this particular product and or material. And Annette will go through those considerations. And based on the outcome of our application, the considerations and the review, we would then make a recommendation on whether to proceed to a test or ensure or requiring that there are test results. If that test is undertaken, either at our facility or some other location, and the results are in fact positive, then that will take us to the steps where we have specific conditions. And I want to underscore the word conditions, meaning they are requirements that will have to be satisfied, and those would be then detailed and explained within an agreement between the city and that particular party. So these are the various steps that will be applied through the policy. So the next part, I'll turn it over to Annette, and she'll go through the policy considerations.
Thanks, Vince. So just a warning in advance, this is going to be pretty content heavy, not in the slides, but what I say. So don't worry about writing everything furiously down, because everyone that's here today will be getting a copy of the survey and the full policy. This is just meant to kind of bring you through each one of the considerations and kind of give you a feel of what we are looking at in terms of a couple of considerations, really. So the first one, no surprise, circular economy. So what you see behind me there is a diagram produced by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. If you want to learn more about the circular economy, then there's great information on their website. It's called the butterfly diagram, and really what it shows is the different stages of resource extraction and the opportunities for resources and materials to be retained in product life cycles, from a hierarchy of making sure that the products are repairable, moving out all the way to finally recyclable. So there you see in that concept that really recycling is not higher up on the hierarchy. You actually want to have that product in use for as long as possible. So how that applies to our policy is we'd really look at the proposed material and say, okay, does this material appear to achieve, or can the producer give us information to show that there's an intent to have that product being produced in a way that contributes towards reduced resource extraction or reduced toxicity in the product of what it is. Secondly, is there an evidence of circular economy design principles, for example, from the material sourcing of what that product is made from, its composition, its design for reuse and packaging reduction, etc. And then finally, is there evidence to say that there's, that manufacturer, product sponsor is providing for opportunities to consistently look at that product and make it better, so to improve its production and its life cycle, full life cycle analysis. Secondly, moving on to consideration number 2, it's the triple bottom line. So we have financial, social, and environmental considerations here. So from a financial standpoint, we would look at that product and say, do existing stewardship programs exist for this product? Also, is there sustainable recycling markets for this product if we were to add it to our stream? If it's a compostable or organic product, what additional biogas benefits does it have if it was to go through our anaerobic digester? What impacts does that product have to our post-processing contracts? So as we add items, we've entered into arrangements with those various contractors based on a scope of work at the time. When we add materials, then that can often add costs to our processing, which then again it gets translated to the ratepayer. So we really want to know up front whether or not that would be an impact there. Can the cost be recovered through any fees, charges, or fines of any way? So they might not be in place right now, but we have that as a place marker to always be looking out for that. If there's no cost recovery, what would be the net cost to the ratepayer? So, we'd have to do quantity determination, volumes, and then all the way through our integrated waste management system. It's not just a matter of adding it. Is there capacity in our infrastructure? Do we need to build bigger material recycling facilities? Do our contracts allow for that increased volume of tonnage coming in? So those are all some type of financial considerations that we would be considering. Moving on to social considerations. Does the addition of the proposed material impact public health in any way? So does it reduce emissions? Is there avoided landfill emissions as a result of adding the material? These are the types of questions that we'd be looking at there. Does the proposed component of material sourcing or manufacturing support local or community social enterprises? So those are also things that we'd be considering in the new product. Does the addition of the proposed material increase or decrease program complexity? So in the cases of some products, for example, coffee pods, just for a lack of something else right now, there's different formats that consumers are able to buy. So is it clear for them to know how to manage the material if we were to add that to our stream? And then finally, moving on to environmental factors. Is there significant potential for an increased diversion from landfill? So how prevalent is that material in our system now, or that we can forecast over time if we were to add it? Is there an independent life cycle analysis for that material? So knowing that just not adding it to our system is solving the problem overall, what's the impact over time for that product specifically? Does the proposed product have any Canadian or international environmental standards or quality standards that it's met already? For example, there's compostable standards that are available, like BPI or ASTM standards, so we'd be looking also whether or not those types of certifications exist. Consideration number 3, consistency with existing provincial and federal measures or instruments. So here we'd really be looking at, is the addition of the material consistent with what the province has in its regulations? For example, the existing Blue Box program, our waste electronics program, used tires, hazardous waste, etc. Is the proposed material consistent with the new Act and the Resource Recovery and Circular Economy Act and Waste Diversion Transition Act? How does the material impact any policy statements in the food and organics waste framework? And is the addition of the proposed material consistent with any other city strategies? So something, again, looking beyond solid waste, but looking to other city strategies if it can contribute towards reducing climate change and other factors. Consideration number 4 is really looking at our contracts. So again, specifically, are there any new contract impacts that we need to consider? Are there implications to our existing contracts throughout the integrated waste management system? And then knowing if there's any impacts to the feedstock and disposal standards that are in place. Finally, other considerations. Jim mentioned that we're working very collaboratively with municipalities near the GTA and province-wide. So what impact does the addition of this material have elsewhere, knowing that a resident that lives in Toronto might have relatives outside of Toronto, or people that live outside of Toronto may work in Toronto? What impact does this have to our surrounding neighbor municipalities? And how would it impact them? And then finally, is there a technical feasibility to actually manage the material in markets to be able to ensure that it's not just being added to the system to not really be fully processed and diverted after it's recovered? So Vince will take over the policy conditions section.
Great, I'll just stay. Can you hear me? Great, I'll just stay here. So these are now the conditions that would be applied if, in fact, the material would be added to any of our diversion streams. Mandatory, and they would be identified and outlined within the actual agreement between the city and the partner or the party. First one, so where applicable, we can require that a test be undertaken at a appropriate facility, whether it be the city's facility or another facility that has the same operations, same processes, and that would, in fact, the results would be relevant to our system. So in the absence of there being that test done, we would require that it be done at our facility. And that test is important because it provides us with information that will help us decide if, in fact, that material can be processed, whether it be at a material recovery facility or whether it be at any of our anaerobic digestion facilities where all our green bin material goes. It has to be proven through the test results that, in fact, it can be successfully processed through these facilities. And important, the stewards would be obliged to pay for the costs of the test. Stewards would also be responsible for communications and education. So we would require from the party in writing a communications, a promotion and education strategy that would identify exactly how they will be educating the users, the residents, on how to properly participate within our programs, okay? It's separate from our P&E programs, which I'll get to that later, but this is over and above what the city does. And it's not just a one-time thing. It would require a multi-year commitment because education doesn't stop after 6 months or even after a year. It takes repeated campaigns and events in order to ensure that, in fact, there is proper participation. So this is where I talk about the requirement for costs being covered, and this is along the lines of extended producer responsibility. So where there is no existing provincial program, and there are a few in Ontario. There's the Blue Box, there's the electronics, there's the tires, and then there's a municipal household and special waste program. But in the absence of a provincial program, then there would have to be compensation provided to the city for any cost pressures resulting from adding that material into our program or into our services. And the cost pressures would include increased costs for P&E. So not only must the steward execute their own P&E program, if we should also have a promotion education campaign regarding that particular material, those costs would be covered. the costs associated with collection, transfer, processing of that particular product, and any residue or contamination resulting from that product being added. There's costs associated with that that would also be included within the requirement. And then the last one, possible, is really just one of those legal things where if we require financial insurance if in fact the steward is purchased by another company or if the market should fail and whatnot. Last condition, standardized packaging. We would require that they provide, a steward provide to us annual written statement that in fact there has been an attempt made to standardize within that particular industry the packaging that is being managed for this particular policy. So those are the essential conditions, requirements that would be identified in an agreement between the city and the party. And that.
Okay. Okay, great. Thanks, Vince and Annette. So pretty dense information there. We will be circulating the draft policy, as Annette mentioned, as well as a survey for people to review it in more detail and provide written comments. I saw a lot of comments come in, so we have about 10 minutes till we need to wrap up, so let's get right to it. If we can get our first question.
How does the city propose to synchronize the addition of new materials to the blue bin with Stewardship Ontario's proposed plan to standardize blue box materials across the province?
That's a great question. Ideally, what we're proposing to do here would be done across the province from the beginning. And certainly we're working with Stewardship Ontario and a number of other organizations in the province to try to achieve that objective. We're unsure as to exactly how long that might take. Elections coming up, whether that legislation will move forward, we don't know. So in the meantime, we're kind of in a situation where we can't afford to wait any longer. So we're moving forward with this. But ultimately, we would set up programs and systems that would align with what the province would be doing so that at the point that there is a provincial system in place, it would be quite easy to transfer it over.
Okay, thank you.
Is this an example of where someone other than the City of Toronto should lead the approach to such policy? For example, an industry group that could bring a broader audience together to collaborate, including retailers, brand owners, waste management, reprocessors, and other municipalities, thus achieving collaboration as opposed to policy?
Potentially, yes. And it all depends on the material, the type of collaboration, how that works. I think absolutely there may be those types of opportunities. There's probably a few examples that exist in industry already where various industries have gotten together to put together a program like that. I'm open to all types of ideas and entertain all types of ideas on how we move this forward in a collaborative way. So that may certainly be an option.
Thank you.
Could this policy also evaluate existing types of packaging waste that go in the garbage that should be reduced or banned because they can't currently be recycled or composted?
We haven't gone there yet.
There are a lot of cards, people saying, why can't black plastics just be banned outright? Especially given the rise of food delivery apps where we've seen a spike in the use of black plastics.
Same response. We haven't gone there yet. But there needs to be an understanding as well, though, that just banning something outright in some cases isn't necessarily the best way to accomplish an objective. That's a great example where there's an opportunity for municipalities, processors, service providers to sit down together with those companies that are putting black plastic into the market and understand is there a broader issue around why they are using black plastic in the first place? There may be, we tend to look as municipal waste management professionals, kind of look at what is the waste management impact of this particular product. There might be a much broader life cycle impact that says black plastic and a complete life cycle analysis makes perfect sense to use. We look at kind of the end of pipe, the waste management solution to some of this stuff. There may be other reasons why it does make sense to do that, and at the end of the day, we might just have to suck it up and deal with it. But that's where the collaboration and sitting down with, there's organizations like PackNext, for example, where you've got packagers, you've got municipalities, you've got everybody sitting at the same table talking about these types of packaging issues. Those types of organizations are critical right now.
Okay, let's try to take 2 more questions before we need to wrap up.
Also, a question I saw a number of times, how does extended producer responsibility apply to internationally sourced products and packaging materials from things such as online sales and international retailers?
Maybe I'll start. Vince can add to it as the policy guy. It does and it doesn't right now. That's part of the need for this new legislation is online sales, or at least the volume of online sales is something that's relatively new in the marketplace. So the legislation needs updating to be able to address things like not just how the material is being sold, but the amount of packaging that's being delivered to your home now is totally different than what it was even 5 years ago.
Okay, let's do one last question.
This one also I saw many times in terms of, this is going back to contamination and contamination of recycling. And why does the city not consider going back to a system where the separation of paper from other recycling materials in order to reduce contamination?
I wonder who asked that question.
A lot of people.
Yeah, and I can probably name a few sitting in the crowd too. This goes back to, for those of you who lived in the city a while, there used to be a 2-stream program where you'd had 2 different boxes, one for your containers, one for your paper fiber. The decision long before I got into this job was made to move to a single cart-based system. And the idea behind that system, and that was not just a Toronto initiative, that was something that started up throughout the industry to move to what we call single stream processing, where all recycling is mixed together for collection. It does allow, in a cart-based system, there are a number of advantages. One is, theoretically, it takes up less storage space. It allows you a larger container to put material in. It puts much less effort on the resident to actually sort the material out. They can just throw everything into one bin. It's more efficient to collect because we can now collect that with one truck instead of collecting with 2 trucks or with a split compartment truck that can be problematic. It does reduce litter in the city. When you're collecting in a cart with a lid, you don't get wind-blown litter like you do in some of the other municipalities that still have blue boxes. So there's lots of good reasons why municipalities went down the road of single stream. I would say that there is reconsideration now in the industry as to whether that was the right move from a market perspective. As these types of markets tighten up and the quality of the material tightens up, the example that I gave with a piece of paper with a coffee stain on it, that may not be the resident throwing that piece of paper with a coffee stain on it into the blue bin. That may occur in the blue bin or in the truck or at the recycling facility when this material is constantly being mixed together. That wouldn't necessarily happen to the same extent in a 2-stream system. We certainly haven't, as Toronto, looked at going back to a 2-stream system. I know some of the producers would like to see move back to a 2-stream system. There's some discussion in the industry around whether that makes sense or not. There's advantages and disadvantages to both, and it's one of those sort of industry issues that you'll get a group of panelists up on the front and they'll argue till tomorrow and never really accomplish anything on which is the right way to go. You can go either way. They have their advantages or disadvantages.
Okay, so on that note, we're going to wrap things up. Vince is going to talk about next steps just for a couple minutes, and then I'll let everyone know how to send in your comments or anything that we didn't get to today. And sorry, Jim's going to do our closing remarks.
Yeah, closing comments. So first of all, what are we on? Comment period. So you will all receive an email with a survey on everything that we discussed today. Again, looking for different opportunities for feedback. I think the comment cards were great to get some comments in today to be able to address, but we're certainly looking for more feedback. And as we kind of move this forward, we'll review it, we'll update it with the policy, and then we're going to bring a report forward to Public Works and Infrastructure Committee, PWIC as we affectionately call it. That'll be coming forward later this year. By later this year, sometime before July, when council recesses, it'll come forward. So I'd encourage everyone to complete that. We do have a number of future engagement opportunities, again, in the interest of collaboration. We are forming a multi-residential advisory group, recognizing the importance of improving diversion, improving communication and education in our multi-residential buildings. So we're going to form a group that's solely dedicated to trying to improve the situation in multi-residential buildings. We're also going to form a circular economy advisory group, which we hope will be a broad representation of stakeholders from all different walks of life and different organizations to talk about some of these circular economy type concepts that we're working on. As you can imagine, this is relatively new stuff for a solid waste division. This is, you know, and Charlotte was joking, she was at a conference down in the States a couple of weeks ago and was talking about circular economy and what that means in a waste management to a bunch of people who collect garbage or landfill garbage on a daily basis. And they look like deer in the headlights in some cases. This is not sort of normal stuff. This is pretty leading edge for a waste management division. Not to say that we're out there farther than anybody else. There's some others that are right there with us in North America, but this is pretty leading edge. These types of concepts we're talking about. The great news is I think we're going in the right direction. The bad news is occasionally we're going to make a mistake. So the more people from the broader and diverse range of organizations we can get together on some of these concepts, I think the more successful we'll be getting where we need to go. We're already planning and forming these groups. We have a listserv, so if you're not on our listserv, that's the sort of general email that we can send out to give you more information, to keep you informed about different things that are going on. If you're not on it now, there's lots of folks here that can answer any questions on how to get on it. Again, you know, maybe we can use the app that we're preparing to start sending some of this information out as well. But really the point is to get as much information out to all of you and open up those lines of communication. There's lots of great ideas I know are in this room today. We need to hear about those types of ideas, and as we kind of carve out what is a municipal waste management role in a circular economy, there's lots of different ideas, and we need to kind of navigate that path to see where we're ultimately going to end up. So with that, lots of opportunities to get engaged. I'd encourage you to get engaged. Again, thank you to our 3Rs ambassadors for being engaged. As I said, it's a successful program. It's a great program. So with that, I want to thank you all for coming today, spending some time with us, and hopefully we will be able to stay in touch on some of these, what I believe are really critical and important issues. So thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, so just a few small housekeeping things. We received a bunch of comments about what we're doing with all of the 72 comments that we received and recorded today. So that report to PWIC that Jim mentioned later this year will have an attachment that summarizes the consultation feedback. So they'll be used to create the themes for those. Again, we will be sending out a survey link later this week where you'll be able to review the policy for addition of new materials with a much closer eye and provide your feedback again that way. My contact information is there. You can always send me an email and anytime, and we'll be able to accept your feedback that way. And the recording of today's event, there will be a link to it, and there currently is a link on the Waste Strategy website, which is toronto.ca/waste strategy. So thanks, everyone. We have the room until 5 p.m. if you'd like to stick around and chat. And Jim has one more thing he'd like to say.
Just one more final comment. When Robin was doing the show of hands at the beginning on who all was here, at some point today, Councillor Davis slipped in from the side. So I wanted to acknowledge Councillor Davis, who is here. Councillor Davis has obviously been a real supporter of the Solid Waste Division and some of the programs and initiatives that we're doing here. So a real champion for the environment, and we appreciate you coming as well. Thank you, Councillor.
There's two of them here.